Releasing music is quite a varied process. Some songs are destined for CD release, some for vinyl, many for streaming platforms, and some for all three. And there are different variables to consider for each. I want to focus in on preparing your music for streaming platforms in this video and give you some best practices for how to approach it, as well as showing you some tools that can guide you along the way. I really want to split this video into two distinct sections. The first is going to help you truly understand how to deliver your audio for streaming. This is taking into account metering, audio formats, and how your mix is going to sound once it's converted to the format that streaming platforms play back. This is going to be using Insight, Adapter Audio's Streamliner, and importantly, Audio Lens. Next, we're going to dig into a mix and see exactly how we can take the information given to us by understanding these processes and translating them into moves you can make in your mix to help them be reproduced better for your listeners. This is going to be using Ozone and RX. Let's check it out. So firstly, before we actually get started, I want to just mention that we're dealing with how streaming platforms output audio, and by design, you're watching this video on a streaming platform, YouTube. So if you're watching this on a speedy internet connection, your experience will be far better than if you're watching this on mobile data, for example. It's something to be aware of because it's possible that the higher quality streams I play you in these comparisons, although they're created as higher quality versions, they may be getting played back to you as less than stellar reproductions. So the differences between high quality and low quality may be slightly less obvious than they should be. If that doesn't make sense or sounds a little strange, then this video is going to be especially useful for you. So here I have Insight open on my main mix bus, and this is after any kind of mix bus processing has taken place. So this is exactly what's going to get exported. I'm using this first of all to get a feel for exactly what's going on in my mix. You can see I've got a few tools open here that are going to help me. Here I'm using loudness, levels, and spectrum. Loudness is designed to help us monitor our overall track loudness over a period of time. This is done using the 3 meters: short-term, integrated, and momentary. We're really going to concern ourselves with the integrated loudness level here. We can set the integrated loudness to a target using the menu here. I'm going to set this to -14 dB LUFS, which is commonly known as a significant value when preparing mixes for streaming. Red means that we've gone above our expected loudness, but more on that later. We also have information about our true peak loudness, which is the overall peak or the very loudest section of the audio being played, taking into account intersample peaks, which may slip through the net with a conventional peak limiter. When we're using codecs to decrease file size for streaming purposes, this value is particularly useful to keep track of. Then below I have the levels module, which is a useful visual representation of how loud the track is. This is useful for people who prefer to see the meters as opposed to just a number of track loudness. Both have their uses, and I find the meters to be a great quick check so you can see what's going on at a glance. Then spectrum is displaying my frequency balance across the audible spectrum. This is a great way of seeing if you have a build-up of low end, for example, as it's going to be easier to see where most of the energy in your track is. These meters are all designed to help you visualize your mix and see what's going on from a facts and figures point of view, which is significant when considering loudness for streaming. The thing about loudness is that the best judge of whether something sounds good or not is our ears. You'll see various pieces of advice saying that platforms like Spotify will reduce or increase the level of a track to -14 LUFS. But does this mean that you should religiously stick to -14 for your mix and never stray from it? Well, in short, no, it doesn't. It's good practice to have an LUFS value to aim for, but if your mix is sitting at -12 dB LUFS and still sounds great, there's no real reason for you to turn it down. In fact, it's quite possible for two masters reading -12 dB LUFS to actually sound different, for one to sound louder than the other, because LUFS is quite a complex topic that covers far more than what may initially appear to just be an overall average level over time. If your mix is sitting somewhere far higher, like -8 or -7 LUFS, the chances are your ears will have told you there's something amiss before your meters. At this kind of loudness, you're likely to be limiting heavily and noticing the artifacts that such extreme limiting is having on your audio. So let your ears be the judge. If you're sitting high on the LUFS scale, but it still sounds great and more importantly fits the genre that your mix lives in, then that should be what guides you. Speaking of genres, this is a very important point. What sounds good for an acoustic folk song, for example, is unlikely to be what you're aiming for when working on a hard-hitting EDM track when considering overall frequency balance. Each of these genres, and indeed every other genre, has its own expected sound that listeners are used to hearing. A listener wouldn't expect to hear the same hard-hitting low-end sub-information from that EDM track as they would in an acoustic folk track, so we shouldn't be looking at them through the same lens. To consider the overall frequency curve of a track, we can use iZotope's Audio Lens. Audio Lens is a desktop application that makes track referencing and comparison easy by analysing audio from any streaming platform or any other audio source. But more than that, you can build your own personal library of reference tracks to compare your own mixes to at any time. Let's check out how it works in terms of this mix. So what you're about to hear is two versions of the same track. The first was created blind, using no reference. Then you'll hear the version of the track that is using the Audio Lens reference. Notice that Modern Pop is selected in the target menu. That's the reference that I've created for my library using Audio Lens. Notice how, whilst the first version doesn't sound bad, once you hear the Audio Lens version, it sounds so much more appropriate for the genre. There's a lift in the low end that we would expect from a modern pop track, and the transient information just becomes a bit more pronounced. So we can match the overall frequency curve of the genre we're working in with relative ease. In fact, if we're using the Audio Lens capture within Ozone, then we're also able to match loudness, dynamics and width, as well as tonal balance. But the missing piece of the puzzle here is that if we're referencing from a streaming platform, then we're not really comparing like for like. Comparing a full quality audio file with a lower bitrate piece of audio isn't exactly comparing apples to oranges, more like comparing an apple to a slightly different apple, one that's passed through a few more hands and isn't quite as fresh as when it fell from the tree. But if we know what to expect from that apple, if we know what the shortcomings are going to be, there's no reason why we can't make the most of it. Often you'll notice that when your audio is taken down to a lower bitrate through one of the many codecs you can use, the high end will lose a little clarity, perhaps become a little washy, transients may get softened, and some of the detail in the stereo image can get lost. Here we're talking about MP3s, Ogg Vorbis, and a plethora of other ways of reducing the bandwidth of an audio file to aid with streaming. This is normal and is expected when reducing the size of your audio file. You can see here in RX that the high-end information changes slightly when comparing the original full quality wave bounce to a lower bitrate version. But it's extremely time consuming to keep bouncing your mix each time you want to hear a different codec in action, and how it's going to affect the track. So using something like Streamliner from Adapter Audio really helps make this process a lot simpler and takes a lot of the guesswork out of the process. So just to briefly explain what this is actually doing and to give you a glossary of terms that you'll hear used when referring to this kind of tool. Codec is a portmanteau of the words encode and decode, so it takes those two words and just puts them together to give us one word that describes the full process. It's a word given to the process of compressing a large audio file to create a smaller file. The file is encoded to reduce the file size, then decoded when played back at the reduced bandwidth. Compression here is not talking about compression in the way that we as audio engineers first think of it. It's not a tool for reducing dynamic range. It's using the far more literal translation. To compress something is to make it smaller. In this case, we're making the file size smaller. This compression can be done in many ways depending on the codec that is used. Bitrate is linked to the size of an audio file. A 16-bit stereo wave file at 44.1 kHz, the kind you would find on a CD, has a bitrate of 1411 kilobits per second, or 1.4 megabits per second. High-rate MP3s such as 320 kilobits per second will sound pretty good, and to many casual listeners will be indistinguishable from the original full-quality audio, whereas a 96 kilobit per second MP3 will be very noticeably different and apparent enough for anyone to hear. When there are more kilobits per second, there is more digital information in the file, so it can be reproduced more closely to the original, thus resulting in better perceived quality. Lower bitrate streams favour small file sizes or lower bandwidth streaming connections over fidelity, so will be very small in size but will lose a lot of information along the way and sound far worse in comparison. When audio file size is compressed or made smaller, it loses some of the information in the process. This is how it actually reduces the size of the file, by rejecting some of the less important information. When a codec loses information, it's referred to as lossy compression, as opposed to lossless compression, where no portion of the file is actually lost, just reconfigured, but that's a story for another time. Let's take a listen to a few of the different codecs available in Streamliner and see how they're going to affect the inputted audio. One of the things that people sometimes don't realize about streaming platforms and the lossy codecs they use is that the applied codec isn't set in stone. Depending on the strength of your internet connection when streaming, the platform may dynamically switch to a lower quality codec to ensure smooth playback, albeit at lower quality. So although we can say that Spotify, for example, uses Ogg Vorbis 320 kilobits per second for premium users, this could actually change depending on the listener's connection to perhaps 160 kilobits per second. So it's important to audition a song through the lower quality codecs as well to give yourself the full picture, but this comes with a caveat. You shouldn't be creating your masters for the lowest common denominator. Don't let all your judgments be guided by catering to those listening on lesser quality streams. You should create masters that sound as good as possible at the highest quality possible, but keep in mind that some may not be hearing all that fidelity. We'll take a look at how to cater for lesser quality streams in a moment. There's another factor that we consider in traditional mastering that is even more relevant when creating a lower quality version of a track, and this is peak level. The peak level of your audio when mastering is usually going to be governed by your peak limiter, and there are a few factors here to be aware of. Firstly, there is a choice between traditional limiting and true peak limiting. I'm not going to get too in depth on the differences between the two, but if you do want a detailed analysis, you can check out the video at the top. Long story short, a true peak limiter will make sure to catch inter-sample peaks that are still present in your audio after using a traditional limiter by working at a higher sample rate. But when we convert down to a low bitrate version, we actually have to set our limiter ceiling lower. Let's take a look. Take a look at the main output meter here on Logic. When I have true peak engaged, it's reading 0.0 dB, which is to be expected as that's where our ceiling is set to. But as soon as I turn true peak off, we get that familiar red clipping light, although the number actually stays the same. This is because although the ceiling is set to 0.0 dB and shouldn't let anything pass, when we don't have true peak engaged, samples are slipping through the net in between what our non-true peak limiter is stopping and causing clipping between the cracks. So we've taken a look at the nuts and bolts of how to meter your audio and the codecs involved in the process for streaming your audio. But how can you actually translate this into mixing and mastering moves that will help your audio sound better? Well, first is going to be the ceiling on your limiter, as we just saw. If you know that your mix is going to be distributed to a few different streaming platforms, then you can audition how your track will sound on each platform through different codecs at different bit rates. If you set Streamliner to output the SoundCloud free decoded version, then you can check your main output on your DAW to ensure there's no clipping taking place. If there is clipping, then you know that you need to bring that limiter ceiling down to compensate. Secondly, the main area that is going to be affected by tonal variations is the high end. Take a listen to the Spotify Premium version compared to the Spotify mobile stream. The Premium is streaming at 320 kilobits per second, whilst the mobile stream is at 96 kilobits per second. As the name suggests, this is optimized for users listening on mobile data, where the connection is likely to be weaker than on a home Wi-Fi network. In fact, we can go one step further here by using Ozone's codec preview tool. By selecting the desired codec and checking solo artifacts, we can hear just what is going to be lost by decoding through a given codec. It's a good way of gut checking what you're going to be losing with a low quality version and also checking what you're saving by altering your mix. there's a significant difference in the high-end information in the low quality when compared to the high quality. This is an inherent issue in low-quality streams, as we saw before, but some EQing and de-essing can help to make these issues less obtrusive. The artifacts are especially noticeable when there are examples of high-end information, such as cymbals and loud S sounds from the vocal. Some gentle de-essing can work wonders here by bringing down the high frequencies to stop it being as much of an issue. The amount you de-ess or EQ is going to be subject dependent, so get to a setting that doesn't detrimentally affect the tonality of the piece, but that helps negate some of the parts you might describe as almost swirly, underwater type effects. Finally, here's one that's going to divide opinion among the purists. You may have seen the mixing in mono video I did a few weeks back. If not, you can check it out at the top here now. But in that video, we saw that having sounds in mono occupies less space in a mix than having something in stereo. Check out the meters on Logic here when I switch the mix to completely mono. This is with a low quality codec engaged. Here you can see an insight. The full stereo version has a true peak maximum of 0.8 dB at its loudest. Whereas when I switch the mix to mono using Ozone, the true peak now reads minus 2.3 dB at its loudest point. Now, I'm not saying everybody should instantly make all their mixes completely mono just to cater for those few listening to low quality streams, but if you know that a large portion of your listeners will be consuming your music from less than stellar reproductions on streaming platforms, then switching some elements of your mix to make them more mono could be an avenue to explore. I'd recommend taking a look at iZotope's Imager module on bus groups in your mix and seeing where you can trim the fat. Reducing stereo width in the high end is likely to have a good amount of impact on what's lost when going through a codec, as they tend to work in mid-side. So we'll be particularly sensitive to anything that's panned very wide, especially in the high end. Doing this in collaboration with auditioning through Streamliner can be a fantastic way to monitor your peak levels at the lowest quality streams. So preparing your mix for streaming platforms, it used to be an unknown realm. You'd make your track sound as good as possible, then pray to the codec gods that it wouldn't sound unlistenable in low quality streams. But it's not 2003 anymore, and there are some great tools available that will not only tell you exactly how your track will sound on these streaming platforms, but also give you the ability to make changes to get the best out of your track wherever it's played back. You can get Audio Lens and start building a library of reference material now at iZotope.com, and you can also get free trials of Ozone, RX and Insight to give you the tools to make your tracks sound great anywhere. Thanks for checking it out. I'll see you again soon. Take care.